Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees here at WCNC Charlotte, and welcome to Live Weather Impact. We have a lot to talk about, not only here in the Carolinas, but of course across the rest of the Atlantic Basin as we are continuing to track Hurricane Erin. Thankfully, Erin made its closest approach to the North Carolina coastline earlier today, so any impacts we have now are on the tail end of the storm. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to still see pretty significant impacts like the storm surge 1 to 3 feet for most areas, maximum 5 feet, or the rip currents. That will actually linger through at least tomorrow, and the rip currents even into early Saturday. But again, the worst of everything, the worst wind, any kind of outer rain bands, a lot of that has started to taper off. So I'm going to start with Erin, but we have a lot of stuff to talk about, so just know that this it's going to be a little bit more involved probably than normal. And then we're going to speak with an expert journalist who's actually on the Outer Banks a little bit more about what they're seeing there. So let's take a first look at live pictures here. So this is a quad box showing Ocracoke. Of course, if you're unfamiliar with the Ocracoke, that's on the Outer Banks. That's one of those islands that you actually have to take a ferry to get to in order to visit. I have actually been there before. Hatteras Village, been there too. Oregon Inlet, as well as Buxton, North Carolina. So these are live videos right now, live feeds. So you can notice that there's still some overwash happening. There is still some storm surge coming on shore. And I think that Erin, while of course very impactful for these coastal communities, was a really good example for people who don't live in the Carolinas, maybe are not familiar with tropical systems, how much damage can actually be done by a storm that is still hundreds of miles away from the coast. I know this is kind of coming back to me, but I grew up in Atlanta, but lived in high school, college, as well as my second station, lived in Florida. That station was Fort Myers, and we would be impacted with crazy waves and coastal flooding, even by a tropical storm that was a few hundred miles off the coast. And it always just seemed like people, other parts of the country, didn't understand that those impacts could still happen, even though the storm was so far away. But it doesn't take an Ian, it doesn't take an Irma, it doesn't take a Florence, it doesn't take, those storms that kind of skirt the coast and eventually move on shore in order to see bad impact. So I think that's just a good reminder. And hopefully it's the only storm we have, I guess technically other than Chantal, that impacted the Myrtle Beach area. But hopefully these are the only two storms we have impact the Carolinas. But even if they aren't, every single storm teaches us best ways or better ways to prepare in the future. Here are current wave heights right now. We're at about 10 to 15 for some of those offshore wave heights closer to the shore, especially in South Carolina. We've already started to drop below 10 feet, so that's of course good news. As Erin continues to pull away, those conditions will continue to improve. Now again, the rip current risk is going to stay elevated. If you've ever seen this map on WCNC Charlotte or on our website, we always average. So for example, if Kill Devil Hills and Hatteras has high, but Hilton Head and Charleston are moderate, I'm still going to put high on the, overall, because it's the worst case scenario, right? So we are going to stay high through at least tomorrow. I do think some of our northern North Carolina coastal communities will still be high on Saturday. So again, that's why I'm averaging those for both those days. I just wanted to mention that because some folks starting to see yellow be mixed in. I don't expect us to be fully yellow for everyone until Sunday, Monday, and then by Monday afternoon, we'll start to filter closer to what I would consider low or pretty normal. Before we talk about our local forecast, I am just going to pop up, I was using some of these graphics in some shows and some of these graphics not in others. A reminder about some of our beach flags. So depending on which beach you are visiting, if you're going to a beach in the Carolinas, you are for sure going to see a single or a double red flag when there's some kind of serious hazard. That could be the water's completely closed with a double, or not completely closed, but there's a hazard with normal. Essentially, think red, right? We think red lights, we stop. Same idea. Now, depending on which beach you go to, yellow sometimes means you're good to go. Oftentimes it will mean also higher surf, rip currents, but not too bad. But suggestion to swim near a lifeguard still. Now again, this will depend on which beach you go to, because a lot of North Carolina beaches no longer use green, which is normally, again, green means go, right? We know that again with traffic signals. So just know that the yellow and the green can kind of mean different things if they're even there, depending on which beach you go to. Most beaches, at least in the Carolinas, specifically in North Carolina, I guess I've just been there more recently, Deb, but they actually will have those signs, kind of reminding people. And then, as always, this obviously is not an Erin issue, but dangerous marine life like sharks, jellyfish, specifically man-o'-war, that's normally when you'd see the purple. So again, just wanted to mention that very, very briefly. And after Aaron, because I know what is going to happen is that things are going to start to get crazy. We're going to start to get some models that go crazy and people are going to start sharing this. So let's just go ahead and get ahead of it. There are a few other tropical waves right now that we're watching in the Atlantic Basin. The first is this area shaded in red. That's Invest 90L. It will likely become our next named storm, but it is taking a similar trek to Aaron, if not even further out to sea. If you look kind of behind it, it looks like it's almost following in Aaron's path. That's because it's taking that same trek because of those same steering currents. Now, the good news is that one, it's a little bit further east, and two, there's so many harsh conditions now because Aaron has caused upwelling in some of these water sources, so it doesn't have the same warm ocean water, things like that, to continue to strengthen. So all good there. Going to stay away from the United States, the area in yellow, again, not an issue, but this is one that I, again, can just see it happening now. We're going to start to get the crazy model runs over the next few weeks. And this is Invest 99L. Now, if you remember back to when we talked about Aaron, when it first formed into a tropical storm, it was 3,000 miles away from the United States. 99L is similar. It is a couple thousand miles away from the United States. If anybody tries to tell you that they know right now where 99L is going to go, maybe you don't want to call them a liar, so don't start a fight, but just know that they don't know. They have no idea. Not only can you see a pretty substantial model split, and this is just the next 5 days, but also it is way too early to know. At this point, we know that the storm has a medium chance of development, and there is a cluster that's trying to form into a tropical storm, but again, it is way, way, way too early to know. I would not be scared. I would not be concerned at this point, but what I would be aware of, is that we are starting to get into the peak of hurricane season. The historical peak is September 10th, but if you were with us last night, we talked about this a little bit, but August 20th, which was yesterday, through October 10th are historically the most active 7 weeks of hurricane season. So again, just think it's that time of the year, that time within hurricane season. Okay, satellite and radar closer to home. We are tracking some storms up in the mountains and foothills. And if you were with us last night, we were talking about this because of this cold front that's starting to at least try to push through the Charlotte area. Now, right now, the biggest cluster of storms is actually south of this front. Ahead of the main frontal boundary, there's a little trough, and you can see a lot of action happening right now southwest of us. So Greenville, Spartanburg, Greenwood, South Carolina, Anderson, Newberry, all of those areas seeing a lot of heavy rain. Now, here in the Charlotte area, nothing. And this trend does look to continue through most of the evening. So I mentioned this during our newscast, but I'm not concerned about the Panthers game right now. If anything changes, if we have a pop-up storm, we'll be the first to let you know. But just know there is at least a chance, especially if you live west of I-77 and in the mountains and foothills, that you could see some isolated rain and storms tonight. Now, tomorrow morning, it's more widespread. We'll have light to moderate rain. I don't think everybody sees it, but it's certainly going to be cloudier, cooler, and rainier to start the day. It won't rain all day, but we'll have a rinse repeat kind of rainy start and then drier middle part of the day on Saturday morning. So the cold front that's moving through now is really not fully moving through. It's going to stall and bring us those cloudy and rainier conditions. But a second front coming next week. And what's going to happen? The best weather that we have had in months. We will have lower dew points in the 40s and 50s, which means drier air, little to no rain, and cooler temperatures. Now, if you're a summer lover, you might be looking at this and thinking, ew, disgusting. But it's not disgusting, because when the average is 88 and you're talking cooler than average, that just means anything below 88 degrees, which means this time next week, Jeb, I hope you celebrate with me. Sunny, low 80s, lows in the low 60s, and even a few mornings in the upper 50s. If that doesn't get you excited for next week, I truthfully don't know what will.
Beautiful first week of school.
Oh my goodness. I know CMS, they go back to school and it's normal, 88, which is our normal high. And then it's boom, middle part of the week, they're probably going to recess, getting a break from all the stuff that the teachers are throwing at them. And the teachers, the students, everybody is so happy. And I can give you even better news is that drier air, that cooler air does look to stick around for at least the last few days of August through August 31st. So a very, very different story, because at the end of July, we were talking about 20 plus days of 90 plus. But here we are looking at the end of August. It's hard to believe we're almost to the end of August in general, but the weather is going to be fantastic. So I'm going to leave this 10-day forecast up, and we have a treat for you as we get Tim Buckley on here. So we have Chief Meteorologist WFMY Tim Buckley from our sister station in Greensboro. And we have a very special guest with Sam Walker, who is a journalist. Some may call him a weather enthusiast, storm chaser, whatever you want to call him. But he has been doing weather and news reporting about big storms in the Carolinas for decades. Sam, Tim, thanks for being here.
Glad to have been invited to be on.
Sam, just expect that we're not going to lose your number.
Yeah, Sam, good to see ya. Yeah, right. Hey, Sam, how's the storm been going over there?
It's been a little windy just today, but really it's all about the waves. We have been dealing with surf, high surf, really since the beginning of the week. And that wasn't just related to Aaron. It was related to what we've been in, this northeast flow, an onshore flow for really the entire month of August out here. We got 1 or 2 days where it kind of laid down and calmed down a little bit, but for the most part, it's not been the best time to be in the ocean this August. And then Aaron, of course, comes and brings the heat in a big way over the last couple of days. And right now, as we speak, we are coming up on high tide. We're coming up on what's expected to be the highest tidal levels and the highest wave levels we've seen throughout Hurricane Aaron's passage offshore. And it didn't take long for the overwash to kick back in Buxton and Hatteras and in Ocracoke, and even on Ocracoke Village and Hatteras Village over the last 2 hours. High tide's coming up about 7:30. And we usually see, 1 to 2 hours before, 1 to 2 hours after is when things will start kicking up anytime we have an overwash event. But, we've seen it 2, even 2.5 hours, and that's exactly what's happened. So this is when the big stuff is expected to happen, and we'll just have to wait and see. And then, things are going to ramp down the next couple of days because we're not going to be done with this anytime soon, it looks like.
Sam, Tim Buckley here again. One of the things about the Outer Banks is that the geography is so different than most of the East Coast, so different than most of North Carolina. What do people that only visit once every year or once every couple of years, what do they need to remember about why it's so fragile out there when it comes to a storm like this?
There's a lot of factors that play into it, and geography is one of them. Think about this. Rodanthe, which we've talked so much about over the last couple of years because of the number of houses that have collapsed, that is the farthest eastern point in North Carolina. And, in fact, the farthest eastern point in the Mid-Atlantic, in the southeast. I wouldn't say the Mid-Atlantic because once we get on up towards New Jersey and all, it starts to jut back to the east. But it's the farthest point out of anywhere on the East Coast, on the southeast coast. So you've got that. Throw in the fact that the Gulf Stream comes right by. You do have deeper offshore water very close to shore than you do, say, down at Myrtle Beach, say off Wrightsville Beach. It's a lot sharper drop-off. And those things combine to give us kind of the perfect storm. We are in that perfect spot for everything to come together, whether it's, the Gulf Stream allows these storms to just explode when they hit them. Nor'easters especially like to do that. Of course, the hurricanes like to ride it because of where we are latitude, on the latitude. As those storms get farther to the north, they want to expand out. Aaron's done the classic thing where it's going extratropical right off of us, essentially. So, we've got so many different factors. The other part of it is that our coast, for the most part, we're talking about 110 miles. The Outer Banks is 110 miles long. You folks in Emerald Isle, that's not the Outer Banks. They like to claim that SOPX thing. No, it stops at Ocracoke. So the northern half is facing northeast. Then it goes, as you get to Rodanthe and comes east and then goes down to Buxton where Cape Hatteras is, and that's more east and a little bit of southeast. Then you jut around towards Frisco and Hatteras Village and down to Ocracoke, you're facing south. So you've got all these different factors, and when you get a storm like Aaron, it just shows how vulnerable we are to this type of scenario where you've got a southeast swell, which is what Aaron was producing for the last couple of days. Then it gets offshore, and the swell shifts to the east. So the southeast-facing beaches just like the image you're showing right now from Hatteras earlier this evening. Or is that's right now? That's pretty much almost now, isn't it? I don't know. That may be an older image now that I think about it, just because looking at that grass. But anyway, what you got there is that the ocean is south there. So all that southeast swell we have been getting for the last 3 days, that's what leads to that overwash. It knocks those dunes down. That area right there actually was an inlet that was formed over 30 feet deep and it was almost a half-mile wide at one point during Hurricane Isabel in 2003. So there's so many different factors that play into why the Outer Banks takes the beating like it does. Part of that is we are a barrier island, and that's what we're designed to do, is to take the beating for the inland areas from the ocean. So all that stuff plays into why things are so extreme out here.
Sam, I have two kind of questions, and I know that you are an expert, and so I know that I can ask you them at the same time.
Okay.
And you'll be able to do them. So my first question is you mentioned this actually during the stream earlier because I saw it during our newscast, and you were talking a little bit about how beach renourishment and things like that, there's actually some areas that can't do it, which is another thing that can hurt the Outer Banks during a storm. But my second question is, a lot of people don't know that some of the Outer Bank islands like Ocracoke, you have to take a ferry to get there if you're trying to visit. How does that impact, trying to get help, I guess, after a storm, right? Because you would think versus, someone trying to come to Charlotte or Greensboro where they can easily have NCOD to get there, to do any kind of, help that they need, Duke Energy, et cetera. What happens when you're on a barrier island that's already hard to get to, and then you add in the addition of having it be something you can only access per ferry?
All right, well, let's start with beach nourishment, beach renourishment. So we have only done beach nourishment on the Outer Banks over the last decade, 15 years. 2011, the first large-scale project of its type was done along the beaches of Nag's Head. It just so happened they literally put the last sand in the day before Hurricane Irene hit. And it proved that beach nourishment could work here on the Outer Banks to protect the dunes and protect the oceanfront properties. So expanded those projects a couple of years later, farther north. So Kill Hills got in, Kitty Hawk got in, Duck Southern Shores got into it over the last couple of years. There has been a beach nourishment project, actually two that have been conducted off Buxton and Avon. And, of course, Buxton is where you're seeing all this footage of the surf crashing up against the motels there and into the neighborhood that's just north of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. They've had a couple of beach nourishment projects, and, in fact, they're due for another one as early as next year. Rodanthe is a different situation. Now, Rodanthe, of course, over the last 5 years, we've seen roughly a dozen homes fall into the ocean that used to have 300 yards of beach and an 8 to 12-foot dune in front of them protecting them. That's just been eaten away over the last 6-7 years. There's a different situation there, and so a lot of that is economic. You don't have that many properties in Rodanthe, Waves, and Salvo. Those are the three villages known as the tri-villages on the north end of Hatteras Island. So they don't have as big a tax base. So part of the way we pay for beach nourishment here is using funds from property taxes that are levied, using special tax districts. Then we use a portion of our occupancy tax, the hotel motel tax, the meals tax that's on prepared meals and drinks. So, use the hospitality taxes to help pay for it. So there's not a funding source, and the early estimates on doing a beach nourishment project in Rodanthe alone would be about $50 million. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that costs have gone up on everything. So that's, where we stand on beach nourishment. Another thing we have to do with beach nourishment here is because of exactly, why so many times you see nor'easters and winter storms be worse for us than hurricanes, is you cannot work on the ocean here like you can maybe off Wrightsville, off Myrtle, in the winter. We do our beach nourishment projects in the late spring and summer to avoid the worst storms. And even though hurricanes aren't bad, hurricanes usually don't hang around for a couple of days like Aaron has done. They're usually in and out pretty quick, 3-4 days, and you can get equipment out of the water, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do that in the middle of winter when you've got successive nor'easters pounding 10, 15-foot surf for days on end. So, there's a lot that goes into why our beach nursery projects are just so different than even our neighbors just to the north in Virginia Beach that'll do them in the middle of the winter. So, long answer to your first question, and now he's forgotten a little bit about what the second question was. So help me out there.
It's okay, Sam.
Yeah.
It was. So the fact that a lot of people don't know that the Outer Banks are obviously the Outer Banks, but there's a lot of areas that you can only get to via ferry. So how that impacts like the second half of the storm, right? Once the storm's over, we're trying to get better.
Yeah, so it does make things, recovery can be more difficult and more delayed here. Ocracoke, obviously, it's an island. It is a true island, only accessible by ferry. You've got the Hatteras Inlet ferry, which takes about an hour and 10 minutes now to go across Hatteras Inlet. You've got two ferries that run from the mainland, one from Swan Quarter and Hyde County. And if you've ever been in eastern North Carolina and you think you've gone into nowhere, try going to Hyde County. You truly are going into nowhere. You think you have left civilization when you go into Hyde County these days. And then the other ferry comes from Cedar Island down towards Morehead City. That's kind of driving out down east Carteret County. We're talking about places where everybody talks with hoity-toity accent. Hoity-toity don't sound sweet. That's how you talk. So the remoteness of Ocracoke. Hatteras is a little easier to access because now you've got a stable bridge. The Mark Bass Knight Bridge was built over of Oregon Inlet, replaced the Bonner Bridge, which was really an issue for years. So, yes, it is much more difficult to get here because there's only one way in, one way out. That's why we had an evacuation. Because of the situation on Highway 12, that's why the evacuation order was issued, because the concerns that Highway 12 would get exactly what's happened to it over the last 48 hours. It'd be covered by sand and ocean water, and the potential for it to be damaged. Now, thankfully, that hasn't happened. One good thing, though, we have going for us is the fact it's sand. We're not talking about I-40 out, in the Pigeon River Gorge at the Tennessee state line where you get a rock slide, or what we saw with Helene, and it takes months to rebuild because you got to get all that rock out of there. It's sand. It can take a day or two at most to get all that sand cleared off. Hopefully the pavement doesn't get damaged. Right now, going into this high tide, we haven't seen that. One thing that does happen, NCDOT stages equipment here. Part of that's because they constantly have equipment here working to move the sand. Think of it as your snow removal like you have in Charlotte, like you have in the rest of the state. We don't deal with snow, but maybe once or twice every few years. We deal with sand, and it's the same thing. You have sand removal. You've got snow removal equipment elsewhere in the inland areas. We have sand removal equipment, so we're used to it. That's already staged, and we do have a pretty good power company that's actually local. They're electric co-ops that service Hatteras Inlet, Hatteras Island, and one that services Ocracoke Island. So they're a little different than, your Duke Energy, which you guys have. We have Dominion Energy, which services northeastern North Carolina, but then we've got a couple electric co-ops that handle the islands. So they're able to stage things pretty quick. We're used to it. I mean, we just call this Thursday on the Outer Banks, all this stuff we're talking about. It's just another day out here. And that's one part of living on an island is you have to be prepared for things like this. And thankfully, DOT's prepared that way, our power companies, all of our emergency responders, and we get a lot of help from the inland agencies as well that are all staged in Greenville waiting to see if they're going to be needed, and hopefully they're not.
Sam, appreciate you nailing down a lot of the geography. To say you guys are used to it, I think, is an understatement. With every storm, you guys have these impacts. Just wanted to pin you down on a couple things. You're saying it seems like, from what you know and all your contacts, that the road hasn't been damaged, to your knowledge, through this high tide.
Yeah, NCDOT, Tim Haas, who's a spokesperson for Division 1 in the ferry division, he held a media briefing down at the Bonner Bridge this we're always going to be calling it the Bass Knight Bridge at Oregon Inlet this afternoon, and confirmed that there has been no compromised pavement, no compromised road bed, that Highway 12 is held so far. And that's very good news. But like I said, we got at least one more high tide cycle, the one that's right now, another one tomorrow morning around 7:30 a.m., maybe tomorrow evenings around 8 o'clock. That one doesn't seem to be as bad because we're going to start seeing the swell really starting to dissipate as we get into the afternoon tomorrow. But yeah, the DOT has confirmed that there is no pavement damage, that Highway 12 is just covered with sand and water, and it's just getting that cleared off. Once things calm down enough, they'll be able to open the road very quickly. That's very typical. We're fortunate that over the last couple of years, some of the hot spots on Highway 12 had a chance to put large sandbags. And we're not talking about the sandbags that you go fill up with the shovel when you got a flood coming, flash flood or flooding coming. We're talking about sand tubes that can be as long as a house, or wide as long as a house, and as wide as a car. These things are huge, and they'll stack them on top of each other to protect the road bed itself. Just had that done at Pea Island at the visitor center, which was blown out back over the last year. We've got that at Ocracoke, and you'll see some of the video that's being shown. If you want to see those sand tubes in action, those are the things that are protecting some of those houses in Buxton right now. I know there's a lot of video circulating from the situation in Buxton at the motels and just north of the lighthouse. A lot of those sand tubes are exposed. That's how those things are massive, and those have really done their job so far in keeping the road from being compromised on Hatteras and Ocracoke so far.
It's great to see that they were able to be prepared so much, and I'm glad that you were able to talk a little bit more about the conditions that you guys are seeing right now. Other than the fact that we know the next high tide cycle is coming, you said within the next 30 minutes or so, are there any other things that you think are important for folks watching WCNC Plus to know about how Aaron impacted you guys before we go?
Yeah, we've still got a lot of surf we're going to be dealing with, a lot of rough surf. And I know you did a great job summarizing, what the beach flags mean. If folks have those plans to try and get in the ocean one more time before school starts next week around the state, for the most part. Some of our markets out here, of course, are Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania. That's where everybody comes from. It's funny, I always tell people, I can be at FedEx Field, I can be at, Northwest Bank Stadium. I can be at Northwest Bank Stadium, I can be at M&T Bank Stadium, and I can be at Lincoln Financial Field faster than I can be at Bank of America Stadium. That's our traditional markets, our DC, and those areas. They're all going back to school. Those folks are going to be coming down. But I know folks are from Charlotte. You're going to be going to Myrtle. You're going to be going to Wrightsville. You're going to be going to Carolina Beach. It's still going to be rough for the next couple of days. It's not going to calm down like that. This is not a situation where the storm's gone, the waves are gone. We're going to be dealing with rip currents right on into the weekend, and not just a high risk, a moderate risk. That's probably number one, is that rip current threat. That if you don't know how to escape a rip current, don't go in the water. Even if you're planning on walking along the beach, and I've stressed this on all the outlets that I've talked to over the last 2 days. We had a situation here a couple of years ago where a 3-year-old boy from New Hampshire knocked down while walking with his mother, who was holding his hand. They were walking along the surf in April in Kitty Hawk, knocked his feet out and was pulled into the ocean. And that can easily happen when we have situations like this. These powerful waves are going to run right up to the dune. So even walking on the beach is a hazard when we have things like this. I won't even get into the compromised septic tanks we may be having and the debris, nail